The night was darker than usual. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and a faint wind carried the scent of salt from the nearby coastline. A single RHIB cut silently through the black waves, its engines whispering against the pounding surf. A small team of U.S. Navy SEALs huddled in their tactical positions, gear strapped, rifles cradled, eyes scanning the horizon. Their target lay inland, a fortified compound that intelligence confirmed housed a ruthless insurgent commander, responsible for countless attacks on Allied forces. The mission was precise, swift, surgical. In and out before the enemy even realized they had arrived. Petty Officer Monroe, assigned as the unit's medic, moved with calm precision at the rear. Her dark eyes scanned for threats, her body tense but controlled, every motion economical and silent. The operators called her Doc, a title simple enough, but behind it lay a reputation few knew. Quiet, competent, seemingly unassuming, she was the last person anyone would suspect of extraordinary combat capability. Her presence was a steadying force, a lifeline for those who knew she could mean the difference between survival and disaster. The team slipped onto the sand, careful to avoid sharp shells and rocks that would betray their position. Each step was choreographed from months of training, muscle memory overriding fear. The night was still, almost unnervingly so. A desert silence stretched across the dunes, punctuated only by the faint lapping of water against the shore. The operators moved in tight formation, each aware that a single misstep could alert the enemy. Halfway to their objective, the calm shattered. The ground erupted beneath them with a deafening roar. An IED, buried beneath the sand and triggered too early, tore through the front of the column. Smoke, fire, and shards of metal filled the air. Bodies flew as screams cut through the chaos. Operators were thrown off balance, some sliding into sand dunes, others rolling over jagged rocks. The explosion left a gaping crater where the lead SEAL had been moments before. Was thrown violently to the ground, her rifle skidding away into the dirt. Pain shot through her shoulder and ribs, a burning, searing agony that made it hard to breathe. Sand clogged her mouth, and the acrid smell of smoke filled her nostrils. She lay still for a heartbeat, trying to assess the damage. Around her, gunfire erupted. Insurgent snipers had begun targeting exposed operators from rooftops and towers, their bullets cutting through stone and sand. The team froze, shocked for only a moment, long enough to register the scale of the ambush, before instinct took over. "Doc is down," one of the operators shouted, panic barely restrained in his voice. For a heartbeat, the unit froze. Losing their medic in the first moments of the operation could have been catastrophic. The reality hit them like another explosion. If didn't survive, they risked losing more than one teammate that night. His hand twitched, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to tell them she was still alive. That twitch sparked hope, a fragile ember in a night of chaos. Despite the pain, she began moving, trying to orient herself. Her training as a medic overrode instinctive shock. She checked her own shoulder, then reached for her tourniquet kit. Blood was pouring freely, the fabric of her uniform soaked. She ripped a piece of cloth to make an emergency dressing, all while the firefight raged around her. Two operators reached her side and dragged her behind a low stone wall. The wall offered minimal cover, but it was enough to shield her from direct fire. They pressed her against the rough stone, checking her vitals. "Carotid pulse," one whispered, his hands shaking. "Nothing." Then faint, almost imperceptible. "She's alive," he said, barely above a breath, but relief radiated from the small team clustered around her. The enemy wasn't slowing down. Insurgent fighters moved in fluid waves, cutting off avenues of retreat. The initial shock of the explosion had left them disoriented, but now their focus shifted to survival. Despite the pain tearing through her body, assessed the tactical situation in seconds. She applied a tourniquet, adjusting it to stop the arterial bleed. Her voice, though hoarse from dust and blood, was steady. "Bandage tight. Move his arm." The operators froze, staring at her. She was giving commands, wounded, bleeding under fire. Calm, precise. a living example of controlled chaos. A sniper had pinned them from a rooftop 30 meters away. Operators peeked out from cover trying to gain visual confirmation, but the shot could come at any moment. Despite the shrapnel wound to her shoulder, lifted her rifle. Her hands shook slightly, but the motion was deliberate. One breath, one squeeze of the trigger. The sniper went down. The team blinked, uncomprehending. Their medic, their lifeline, their healer had just neutralized a lethal threat. Allowed herself a small moment to exhale. Pain radiated, but her mind was already shifting to the next threat. She assessed the team's positions, checking that no one else was critically wounded beyond what she could handle. Her eyes scanned the compound ahead, looking for choke points, cover, and enemy movement. This was the moment when the unit realized something about that they hadn't known before. She wasn't just a medic. She was a combat-hardened operator, someone who could fight as fiercely as she could heal. The calm, quiet doc they had trusted with their lives was capable of extraordinary, even lethal precision. As they prepared to continue the mission, his gaze locked with the team leaders. No words were necessary. The understanding passed silently between them. The operation had changed. Survival was now paramount, and their medic had just become the center of their hope. The distant hum of helicopter engines, their scheduled extraction, was still far off. The night held dangers they couldn't yet see, and enemies they hadn't yet engaged. But for the first time, the SEALs knew they weren't just relying on training and firepower alone. Monroe, bleeding but unbroken, had reminded them what it truly meant to survive in combat. And the night was far from over. The smoke and dust swirled around the shattered stone wall where the team had dragged Monroe. The acrid stench of gunpowder filled her nostrils, burning her lungs. She could hear the rapid staccato of automatic weapons in the distance and the sharp cracks of sniper fire overhead. Blood soaked through her uniform, sticky and warm against her skin. Her shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, and her ribs screamed with each shallow breath. Yet through the chaos, her mind remained unnervingly clear. Two operators crouched beside her, eyes wide, hands tense as they checked her vitals. One pressed fingers against her neck, counting pulse, panic threading his tone. Nothing. Then faint, a flutter, fragile and desperate. "She's alive," he whispered, voice barely carrying over the cacophony. Relief rippled through the small group like water washing over scorched earth, but there was no time for celebration. Enemy fighters moved closer, their flashlights cutting through the night, rifles ready. Opened her eyes, vision blurred, pain radiating from her shoulder and ribs. She felt the cool grit of sand against her cheek and smelled the coppery tang of her own blood. Her first thought was the team, the men and women who were counting on her. If she faltered now, lives would be lost. Her fingers brushed against her medical kit, dragging it closer with one hand, ignoring the searing pain. "Tourniquet, 2 clicks," she said, her voice calm, precise, almost eerily composed. She winced, biting back a sharp inhale of pain as she adjusted the arterial bandage on her upper arm. Every motion was deliberate, every decision calculated. The operators watched in disbelief. She wasn't merely surviving, she was taking control. The sniper who had pinned them from a nearby rooftop remained a threat, shifted slightly, adjusting her position to get a line of sight without exposing herself further. Her rifle felt awkward in her injured grip, but she raised it nonetheless. Time slowed. She exhaled, focused, and squeezed the trigger. A single, precise shot rang out, echoing in the night. The sniper dropped, lifeless, before they could pull another trigger. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the distant staccato of gunfire elsewhere in the compound. The team stared, wide-eyed, at the woman who had just eliminated a trained marksman while bleeding and wounded. For them, the realization was staggering. Their medic wasn't just a healer. She was a fighter, trained, lethal, experienced. "Doc, you didn't tell us," one operator muttered, disbelief lacing his voice. Didn't answer immediately. Her jaw clenched as she focused on the task at hand. Another wave of insurgents moved toward their position, but the team's defensive posture had shifted, guided entirely by her commands. She directed suppressive fire, coordinating their limited ammunition, prioritizing targets with the instinctive precision of a seasoned operator. One of the older SEALs, a former Marine raider, shook his head slightly, speaking quietly so only the nearest operators could hear. "She didn't tell you. She ran 3 Afghanistan rotations in assault operations before switching to medical. She's Delta qualified." The words fell like stones into the tense air, sending ripples of awe and disbelief through the group. The quiet medic they had trusted to save their lives had, in a previous life, taken them as effectively as anyone in their unit could. She had chosen medicine after a teammate she couldn't save died in her arms. She was healer and warrior both, someone forged in the extremes of combat, tempered by loss. The team leader, eyes scanning the darkened compound, made a subtle hand signal, and the operators themselves for movement. Extraction wasn't here yet, and the enemy was closing in from 3 sides. Every step, every breath carried the weight of potential death. Yet, still bleeding, still weak from the blast, continued to assess, to command, to fight. "Suppressive fire on the left flank. Move 2 operators to cover that window," she instructed, voice low but unwavering. Operators obeyed, trusting her instincts even as bullets zipped past, and explosions shook the ground beneath them. Each action was precise, a combination of her medical and combat training, triage intertwined with tactical calculation. She stabilized a wounded teammate mid-movement, applying pressure to a deep leg wound while another operator laid down covering fire. The distant hum of approaching helicopters, the extraction team grew louder but didn't allow herself a moment's relief. She assessed ammunition, mapped enemy movement, calculated angles. Her mind worked faster than her body could respond. Her shoulder was burning, her ribs protested each breath, but her brain remained sharp, unyielding. Then a new threat appeared. A truck-mounted machine gun emerged from the shadows at the edge of the compound. Its operator opened fire, forcing the team to duck for cover. In a maneuver that seemed impossible for someone so wounded, crawled to a small ledge, sighted the gunner and fired. The enemy fell before they could react. The team's morale surged, tempered by the sobering reality of their situation. They moved forward, inching toward the extraction point, under the ghostly moonlight that occasionally peeked through the clouds. Every step was dangerous, every breath a gamble. But's presence, the knowledge that she was alive, conscious, commanding, gave them hope, a fragile shield against despair. Somewhere behind her, a younger operator whispered, "She's not just a medic, she's something else." She didn't hear, she couldn't, not yet, not until they were all safe. The night stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Fires burned, shadows shifted, and enemy forces adjusted, probing their defenses. And through it all, Monroe remained the anchor, bleeding, battered but alive, unbroken, and commanding the attention of every operator who knew their survival depended on her. As they prepared to move to the next cover point, the distant whop-whop of helicopter blades became louder, signaling the approach of extraction. Relief edged closer, but danger remained. The desert night had yet to release its hold, and the team had learned a hard truth. Losing Monroe would mean losing more than a medic. It could mean losing the fight entirely. She was alive, she was unbroken, and for the team that realization was the spark that could keep them all alive. The night still hung thick and heavy over the desert, filled with smoke, sand, and the acrid stench of gunfire. The team had hunkered down behind shattered walls, breathing hard, muscles tensed, hearts hammering. Every operator was aware of the truth they had only just realized. Monroe, their medic, was far more than a healer. She had survived the blast, neutralized a sniper, and coordinated defensive fire despite her injuries. And yet, even in that moment of awe, the threat had not gone away. Enemy combatants continued to flank them from multiple angles, probing for weaknesses. The older SEAL who had served in Afghanistan leaned closer to one of the younger operators, his voice low. "You didn't know, did you?" The young man shook his head, incredulous. I mean, she's always been calm, but this, he gestured vaguely at the chaos around them. She's like unstoppable. She ran assault operations, the veteran whispered. Delta attached, 3 combat rotations. She crossed into medicine after losing a teammate she couldn't save. That's why you've only ever seen the quiet side. That's why she's called Doc. The revelation hung in the air like a weighty storm cloud. The team looked at it in a new light. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the battlefield, issuing concise instructions. Every movement was deliberate, every breath measured. She didn't just patch wounds. She anticipated danger, calculated angles, and neutralized threats with lethal precision. Noticed the subtle change in their gazes but didn't comment. Words were a luxury she couldn't afford. They were pinned down, their options limited, and extraction was still minutes away, maybe longer. She took stock of the team's condition. 2 operators bleeding, ammunition running low, and enemy fire increasing in intensity. Her shoulder throbbed, ribs screamed with every shallow breath, and a piece of shrapnel embedded near her collarbone sent shocks of pain up her neck. Yet her mind remained razor-sharp. Suppressive fire on the left flank, she barked, voice clear, commanding. Move 1 operator to the window, cover Sector 3. We hold here until extraction. They moved as one, a well-trained machine executing the will of a leader none of them had expected to have. Worked methodically, checking vitals, applying field dressings mid-firefight, and adjusting defensive positions. She was a surgeon and a tactician simultaneously, the duality of her skill unmatched in the chaos. From behind the team, a flash of light caught her attention, a reflective windowpane in the enemy compound. A sniper had returned, attempting to regain position. His finger tightened on the trigger instinctively, despite the pain radiating from her shoulder. She exhaled, aimed, and fired. 1 shot, perfectly timed. The sniper went down silently, another lethal strike delivered from a medic who should have been incapacitated. The younger operators exchanged glances, all mixing with fear and respect. This was no ordinary combat medic. They had trained for years with skilled marksmen, but none had demonstrated the calm, measured lethality displayed while simultaneously stabilizing teammates. She ignored their stares, focusing on the unfolding situation. The insurgent reinforcements weren't waiting. They adjusted their tactics, moving in waves, attempting to divide the team. Quickly assessed their approach, spotting vulnerabilities in the cover and angles that could be exploited. 2 men to the rear, she instructed, voice low but firm. Keep pressure on the eastern approach. We can't allow them behind us. As the operators repositioned, turned her attention to the 2 wounded teammates. One had taken a shrapnel hit to the leg, the other a grazing round across the chest. Kneeling between them, she worked quickly and methodically. She applied pressure, stabilized fractures, and checked breathing. Every movement was precise. There was no hesitation, no panic, only efficiency born of years of training and the hard lessons of combat experience. A brief lull arrived, a heartbeat of silence in the storm. The team huddled behind walls, breathing ragged, ears straining for the next sound. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of approaching helicopter blades signaled extraction, but didn't allow herself relief. Not yet. They were still in enemy territory, still under fire, and every second mattered. The commander caught her eye, recognition dawning on him. "Doc, you've been hiding something from us," he said quietly, almost incredulously. Allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I never needed to prove anything," she replied, voice low. "I just make sure everyone comes home." The older SEAL muttered under his breath to the others, recounting her past exploits: Afghanistan, assault operations, solo clearance of enemy compounds. The younger operators listened, stunned. They had trained alongside her for months, maybe years, and yet never imagined the depth of her experience. She had chosen to be their medic, to be the quiet anchor in chaos, but she was capable of so much more. Suddenly, the enemy launched another coordinated push. Insurgent fighters surged from the shadows, attempting to flank the team. His mind raced. She analyzed every angle, calculating how to maximize cover, suppressive fire, and field medical intervention simultaneously. "Hold this line," she ordered, adjusting a bandage mid-command. "I've got Sector 3, watch the rear." Her team moved as instructed, firing, ducking, and covering. The moment stretched into eternity, a tense dance of life and death. Bullets splintered stone, sand sprayed, and screams echoed across the desert night. Through it all remained steady. She crouched low, rifle ready, bleeding but unbroken. Her eyes darted from one threat to another, then back to the wounded operators. Every command, every motion was precise, a testament to her dual life, operator and medic. The team survived that wave of the attack because of her. As they caught their breath, took a moment to assess the next move. Extraction was near, but they were far from safe. The enemy wasn't giving up, and the night, dark and merciless, stretched on, demanding courage from every soul alive. The team now understood the truth. Losing Monroe would have been catastrophic. She wasn't just their medic. She was their shield, their guide, their lethal edge in the chaos of combat. And even bleeding, battered, and breathing through pain, she had shown them something undeniable. She was alive, unbroken, and more dangerous than any of them could have imagined. The faint thrum of helicopter rotors grew louder in the distance, but his gaze remained sharp. Her focus never wavered. The battle was far from over, and she had made it clear she would not yield. Not to pain, not to fear, not to the enemy. She was alive. She was unbroken, and she was the line between life and death for every operator in that desert compound. The desert night had become a hellscape of smoke, dust, and gunfire. Explosions shattered the silence, sending debris into the air, and the scent of burned sand and metal burned the operators' lungs. Enemy trucks roared from the far side of the compound, engines screaming, their mounted guns spitting tracer rounds toward the SEAL team. The team ducked behind shattered walls and low stone barricades, hearts hammering, eyes wide, adrenaline surging. Monroe's shoulder burned with pain. Shrapnel embedded beneath her uniform sent waves of agony up her arm every time she breathed. Her ribs screamed with each movement. Sweat and blood slicked her palms. Every instinct screamed for her to fall back, to take cover, to let someone else handle the firefight. But she didn't. The enemy had surrounded them on 3 sides. Their numerical advantage was overwhelming. Ammunition was running low. And yet, moved like a conductor in the eye of a storm, orchestrating her team with calm authority. "No morphine," she told one operator who tried to offer it. "I can't lose focus. Not now." Her voice was firm but quiet, almost eerily steady despite her injuries. The team leader looked at her in disbelief. "You can't keep going like this, Monroe. You're bleeding out." "I've been bleeding out since the blast," she said without hesitation. "Get the others patched. I'll hold this sector." She shifted her weight, crawling slightly to avoid incoming fire, and assessed the terrain. The enemy had chosen their approach carefully, fast, coordinated, relentless, but had anticipated this. Her mind raced, calculating every angle, every crossfire lane, every defensive choke point. "2 men on the left wall," she commanded. "Cover the rear corridor. I've got the window sector. Overwatch, suppressive fire only." The operators obeyed instinctively, trusting her judgment despite the chaos. Some moved with precision, others stumbled but kept their focus. His presence was magnetic, her calm authority the tether holding the team together in the eye of the storm. Explosions rattled the compound. A rocket slammed into the perimeter wall, sending chunks of stone flying in every direction. Barely flinched. She shifted her aim, sighting through the dust-filled air, and fired at the first enemy combatant attempting to flank them. Another fell. Amid the chaos, she noticed 2 wounded teammates nearby. One had a deep leg wound, the other a chest graze. Kneeling beside them, she applied pressure, stabilized fractures, and reassured them. "You're okay. Just hold still," she whispered, even as bullets whizzed past inches from her head. The younger operators watched in awe, realizing they were witnessing something beyond mere training. Was a living testament to the duality of survival, healer and fighter, calm and deadly, vulnerable and unbreakable. Another insurgent emerged from the shadows, advancing with a rifle aimed at the team's left flank. Without hesitation, fired twice in rapid succession. The threat dropped instantly. The operators breathed a collective sigh of relief, but there was no time to linger. The enemy pushed again, more coordinated than before, attempting to divide and conquer. "Hold, funnel them into the courtyard," shouted. "We'll make every step costly." Her tactical mind worked faster than the pain allowed her to feel. She adjusted defensive angles, redistributed ammunition, and ensured every operator was in position for maximum efficiency. She moved with precision, each motion calculated, each command clear. She was simultaneously medic, tactician, and lethal combatant. The enemy pressed closer. Their numbers seemed endless. Machine guns rattled, rifles cracked, and grenades exploded around the perimeter. Despite exhaustion and blood loss, crawled to the narrow entry corridor of the compound, the perfect funnel point she had identified earlier. "This is where we make our stand," she said, more to herself than anyone else. The team shifted into position, creating overlapping fields of fire. Each operator took careful aim, but it was who orchestrated the deadly trap. Enemy combatants charged into the corridor, only to be met with calculated suppressive fire. Bodies fell in silence, the methodical precision of her strategy evident. Amid the carnage, she kept checking the team, ensuring no one else was critically wounded. One operator whispered, "Doc, you're insane," and another muttered, "How is she still standing?" Her response was a brief, grim smile. Pain radiated from her shoulder and ribs with every movement, but she remained composed. Every decision, every command was deliberate. She was unbroken. Then an RPG slammed into the perimeter wall beside her. The blast threw her violently to the ground, dust and debris filling her eyes and mouth. For a terrifying moment, there was no movement. The operators rushed to her side, hearts hammering, expecting the worst. Groaned, coughing through grit and blood. "I'm fine," she whispered, more annoyed than hurt. Her pulse was rapid but steady. She pushed herself up, ignoring the searing pain. "Let's finish this." The team, inspired and terrified all at once, resumed their positions, ready to continue the fight. The extraction helicopter was still minutes away, but had ensured they could survive until its arrival. She moved methodically, checking wounded operators, reinforcing defensive positions, and keeping eyes on every threat. For the first time that night, the SEALs understood the full weight of their situation. They had survived chaos, explosions, sniper fire, and ambush because of Monroe. Not just a medic, not just an operator, a force capable of holding the line against impossible odds. The night stretched on, filled with distant explosions, shouting, and the ominous hum of approaching enemy vehicles. Yet remained steady, bleeding, wounded but alive, a beacon of calm in the storm. The team's survival depended on her, and she refused to fail them. She was alive, she was unbroken, and as the enemy regrouped for another assault, it was clear to everyone that they were still in the fight because of her. The desert night seemed endless. Smoke hung thick in the air, sand and grit coated the team's gear, and the scent of blood and burned earth made the operators' stomachs churn. The enemy had regrouped, adjusting tactics, moving in waves with relentless precision. Bullets splintered stone and tore through makeshift cover, and the faint whir of the approaching extraction helicopter still felt miles away. In the midst of it all, Monroe remained the anchor, bleeding, battered, but impossibly alive. Her pulse was rapid, each beat sending a jolt of pain through her shattered shoulder and ribs. Shrapnel had embedded in her collarbone and thigh, each movement a reminder of the blast that had rocked their insertion. She was exhausted, her vision blurred, yet her mind worked with relentless focus. Every command, every observation, every calculation had to be perfect, One mistake could cost lives. One of the younger operators, pale and wide-eyed, glanced at her and whispered, She's insane." Didn't respond. She didn't have time to. Two operators nearby groaned, one clutching a chest wound, another pressing desperately at a deep leg injury. Blood coated her hands as she moved between them, assessing injuries with swift, precise efficiency. Her fingers pressed against arteries, knots were tied with practiced speed, and compressions were applied with confidence that came only from experience. She stabilized them under fire, speaking in calm, measured tones. "You're okay," she reassured the chest-wounded SEAL. "Breathe, don't fight it." He coughed violently, pain etched across his face, but he obeyed. Adjusted the tourniquet on the other operator's leg, wincing as a jolt of agony shot up her arm. A round cracked nearby, sand and stones spraying around them, but she remained focused. Her mind, honed by years of combat and loss, filtered the chaos into actionable priorities. The team had started to notice something remarkable. This wasn't just a medic who could patch wounds. This was a warrior who moved with lethal precision, even while injured, even while bleeding. She had already neutralized enemy snipers, orchestrated defensive fire, and stabilized multiple casualties under constant threat. Her calm had become contagious, a lifeline for the men and women relying on her. As worked, she felt a familiar memory surface, a flashback to Afghanistan years earlier. A narrow mountain pass, an ambush, her teammate bleeding out in her arms. The screaming, the helplessness, the failure. That day had changed her forever. She had switched to combat medicine after that loss, vowing never to let a teammate die if she could prevent it. Every operation, every tour, every injury she had endured was a step toward fulfilling that promise. The memory sharpened her focus. Another wave of insurgents surged forward, attempting to exploit the chaos. One operator was pinned, unable to move under suppressive fire. Ignoring the stabbing pain in her shoulder, crawled to him, rifle slung across her back, and applied immediate medical intervention. Needle decompression, pressure on a collapsed lung. The man's breathing eased, ragged but steady. "You're alive," he muttered weakly, gripping her wrist in gratitude. "Stay that way," she replied, voice tight but steady. She glanced over the compound, assessing enemy positions, reloads, and ammunition status. Each operator moved as instructed, responding to her commands as if she were both leader and medic simultaneously. The extraction helicopter's blades grew louder, but the enemy continued their relentless push. Another explosion rocked the perimeter, sending debris flying, and a third operator cried out from a deep wound. Moved again, her movements fluid despite pain and fatigue. Blood soaked her uniform, her breathing came in shallow bursts, and yet her determination never wavered. The team followed her lead without hesitation. She was a living example of courage, resilience, and calculated brutality. They had learned the hard way that survival depended not only on skill but on trust, and had earned theirs completely. Through the smoke, she caught sight of an insurgent attempting to flank from the east. Without hesitation, she raised her rifle, aimed, and fired twice. Both targets dropped. The team's morale surged. Their medic had saved them again, but didn't pause to celebrate. She returned immediately to her patients, stabilizing a breathing pattern, applying bandages, ensuring that every wounded teammate remained alive for extraction. Suddenly, a round slammed into the ground near her, throwing sand and grit into her eyes. Her shoulder screamed with pain, each movement a challenge, but she ignored it. Her mind remained clear, unbroken. Another operator glanced at her, disbelief etched across his face. She's holding us together." Allowed herself only a brief pause to glance at the night sky. Smoke and sand swirled above, obscuring the moon, but the faint hum of helicopter rotors grew steadily louder. Extraction was near, but the enemy had not yet relented. They were trapped, pinned, and surrounded. And yet, despite every injury, every wound, every moment of exhaustion, Monroe remained upright, commanding, alive. Her voice cut through the chaos again, directing positions, ensuring coverage, calculating angles. "Hold this line. No one falls. We move together." The operators obeyed instinctively. They had seen her in action. They knew what survival meant, and they knew that under guidance they might all make it out alive. A second round of insurgents surged forward. The team unleashed suppressive fire, coordinating perfectly with her commands. The narrow entry corridor she had designated earlier became a deadly funnel, and enemy forces fell in numbers they could not have anticipated. Despite their numerical advantage, the attackers were systematically neutralized under her leadership. Finally, as the first shadow of the helicopter approached, allowed herself a fraction of relief. The battle was far from over, but for the moment, she had ensured that every operator was still alive. She slumped slightly against a wall, breathing shallowly, the weight of pain and exhaustion pressing down. The team now understood fully what they had been blessed with. Monroe wasn't just their medic. She was their shield, their strategist, their lethal edge. She had faced death twice and come out alive. She had stabilized the wounded, orchestrated deadly traps, neutralized threats, and inspired the entire unit to survive. As the helicopter's blades cut through the desert night, caught her breath, bloodied, battered, and yet unbroken. The extraction had arrived, but her work was far from finished. She had proven herself once again, alive, unbroken, and indispensable. The operators glanced at her with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and disbelief. Some whispered quietly, almost reverently, "She's not just a medic, she's a warrior." Simply tightened her bandages, adjusted her grip on her rifle, and prepared for the next wave. She was alive. She was unbroken. And the desert night had learned if you faced her, you would not break her and she would not break. The desert sky was heavy with smoke and the distant glow of burning compound walls. The thrum of helicopter blades approached, growing louder with every second, yet the enemy was relentless, surging in waves as if the night itself had risen against them. The SEAL team pressed forward, each operator moving under Monroe's guidance, every step calculated, every breath measured. Despite the chaos, despite her injuries, remained the pivot point of the entire operation, bleeding, battered, but alive, unbroken. Her shoulder throbbed with a constant, searing ache. Each inhale pressed her ribs like knives. Each movement sent jolts of pain from embedded shrapnel. Yet she ignored it. She couldn't afford to slow down, not now. Around her, operators were pinned behind fractured walls, bullets snapping past like angry hornets. Smoke and dust filled the air, turning the battlefield into a murky, suffocating labyrinth. Spotted the first insurgent attempting to flank their left side. Without hesitation, she raised her rifle, firing 2 precise shots that dropped him instantly. The younger operators stared, eyes wide. They had seen skilled shooters before, but none moved with the calculated calm and lethal precision of their medic, even while bleeding. "Cover the rear corridor," she barked, voice strong, unwavering. "Suppressive fire on Sector 2. Move." Operators obeyed instinctively, repositioning as she assessed the battlefield. She crawled toward the narrow entry corridor she had designated earlier, the perfect funnel point, scanning for threats even as blood dripped down her uniform. Another explosion rocked the compound. Dust and sand clouded her vision. Her head throbbed, vision blurred, but her mind remained focused, precise, unbroken. From behind, an enemy combatant emerged suddenly, rifle aimed at the team. Without thinking, fired first. The threat went down instantly. The younger operator whispered, "How is she still standing?" She didn't respond. No words were needed. Survival demanded focus, not chatter. The helicopter drew closer, its searchlights cutting through smoke, illuminating the battlefield in stark relief. The extraction team's arrival should have been a relief, but the enemy surged even harder, desperate to prevent their escape. RPGs streaked across the night sky, exploding near the perimeter and throwing sand and debris into the air. Pressed on, moving to stabilize a wounded operator at the front of the line. His breathing was shallow, his leg was mangled. Ignoring the pain in her shoulder, she applied a tourniquet, adjusted his airway, and checked his pulse. "Stay with me." "You're not going anywhere," she whispered, even as bullets shredded the wall behind her. The team began to move toward the landing zone, but the corridor they had planned as a funnel was under intense enemy pressure. Assessed quickly. "Hold here. Funnel them into the kill zone. We move when the bird touches down." Operators obeyed, setting up overlapping fields of fire under her orders. Every enemy that advanced was met with precise, controlled suppressive fire. Despite their numbers, the attackers fell systematically. Shifted, firing over cover, providing both lethal precision and direction for her team simultaneously. Then a rocket-propelled grenade struck just yards away. The blast threw backward into sand and rubble. Pain tore through her body, every breath a knife. For a terrifying second, she didn't move. Operators rushed to her side, their faces pale with fear. Groaned and pushed herself up, ignoring the searing agony. "Move, cover the extraction," she shouted. Her voice carried authority, command, and unbroken resolve. The helicopter descended, its skids kicking up a storm of sand and debris. Enemy fire intensified, desperate to stop them from escaping. Crawled forward again, dragging herself toward the team's forward line. Another insurgent attempted to breach their flank. She fired instinctively. Another enemy dropped. Operators began loading wounded onto the skids. Helped steady the first, bleeding freely from her shoulder, sweat, blood, and grime coating her skin. "Keep moving, don't stop," she barked. Finally, it was her turn. Hands grabbed her, pulling her toward the helicopter. She stumbled, almost collapsing, but she refused to go down quietly. Another insurgent raised his weapon. Reflexively, she fired, neutralizing the threat before anyone could react. Inside the helicopter, medics rushed to her side. Monitors attached, oxygen administered, adrenaline still pumping. Her blood pressure was dropping, and every breath came in shallow bursts. The rotor blades thumped against the night like a drum of salvation. The team sat tense, eyes wide, listening to every sound, every whisper. None of them had words. They had survived impossible odds, and it was all because of Monroe. One operator leaned close, voice trembling. You saved all of us." Allowed a brief nod, a faint smile through exhaustion. She was alive. She was unbroken. But the fight wasn't over, not for her, not for the team. The helicopter climbed higher, moving through the night sky, away from the burning compound. Behind them, enemy forces scrambled in confusion, unable to continue the fight effectively. For the first time that night, the SEALs allowed themselves a breath. Not relief, not celebration. Survival was not victory yet. Lay back, bloodied, battered, every inch of her body screaming. She could feel every wound, every broken rib, every shard of shrapnel. Yet her mind remained sharp, calculating, unbroken. Every operator in that helicopter knew the truth. They owed their lives to her. She had held them together under impossible pressure. She had stabilized the wounded while neutralizing threats. She had led, fought, healed, and survived. The night stretched on outside the helicopter, dark, relentless, full of unseen dangers. But inside, Monroe's presence was a shield, a lifeline, a reminder of what unyielding courage could accomplish. She was alive. She was unbroken. And as the helicopter carried them away from the compound, the team understood what survival truly meant. Having someone like Monroe at your side, bleeding, hurting, yet still standing, commanding, and protecting every life around her. No enemy, no explosion, no wound could break her. Not that night, not ever. The desert was behind them, replaced by the sterile, blindingly bright lights of a forward operating hospital. The hum of ventilators, beeping monitors, and hurried footsteps filled the air, yet none of it shook Monroe. She lay on the gurney, bandages wrapped around her shoulder and ribs, IV lines hooked to her arm, her uniform soaked in blood and dust. Her body screamed in protest, every movement sending shocks of pain through her chest and limbs. But her eyes remained alert, scanning the room, aware of every sound, every movement. The team hovered nearby, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and awe in their expressions. They had survived against overwhelming odds but had done more than survive. She had carried them through it. Every operator who had crawled, fired, bled, and breathed that night owed her their life. And now, seeing her on the gurney, they were struck by the magnitude of her sacrifice. A nurse adjusted the oxygen mask, her hands gentle but firm. "Stay calm. You're stable now. You're going to be okay," she said. Gave a faint nod, acknowledging the words but unable to respond fully. Her body was racked with pain. The memory of the blast, the bullets, the chaos, still burned in her mind, vivid and unrelenting. The commander of the unit approached, moving quietly so as not to startle her. His eyes, heavy with exhaustion, studied her face. "You saved every one of us," he said softly, almost reverently. His lips quirked into a faint, tired smile. "That's what a medic does," she whispered. But the team knew better. This wasn't just a medic. This was a warrior who had faced death multiple times, twice against overwhelming odds, and come out alive. She had healed the wounded, neutralized threats, and maintained control of the battlefield while bleeding through shrapnel wounds. She had fought, bled, and survived when most would have faltered. A younger operator stepped forward, hesitating. "Doc, were you scared?" His voice was tentative, almost afraid of the answer. Eyes softened, and for the first time the mask of unwavering strength slipped slightly. "Of course," she admitted quietly, "but someone needed me standing." The room seemed to shift with her words. She had faced explosions, bullets, fire, and death itself. Yet her courage was not born of fearlessness. It was born of responsibility. She had survived not because she lacked fear, but because she refused to allow fear to dictate her actions. As the medics worked, her mind wandered back to the desert, the flames, the gunfire, the screams. Faces of wounded teammates flickered in her memory. She remembered every decision, every shot, every bandage applied under fire. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on her, the mental toll heavier than the physical pain. But then she reminded herself, survival was never just about the body. It was about the mind, the focus, the ability to endure and lead. Hours passed. The wound care, the IVs, the monitoring of vitals became a rhythm, almost hypnotic. Operators who had been injured and stabilized were moved to recovery areas. The team lingered near her gurney, unwilling to leave, as if their presence could somehow repay the debt owed to the woman who had saved them all. Eventually, the room grew quieter. Eyes fluttered, exhaustion overtaking her conscious focus. She drifted between sleep and awareness, haunted by fragments of the night's battle. Explosions, gunfire, screams, all replayed in her mind. But amid the chaos, there was also clarity. She had done what she had trained to do, what she had chosen to do. She had led. She had healed. She had survived. When she finally opened her eyes fully, it was morning. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, casting harsh lines across the room. Her shoulder ached violently, her ribs protested every breath, yet she felt the quiet victory of being alive. The team stood nearby, unsure how to act, a mix of reverence, awe, and gratitude in their expressions. "You guys look worse than I do," she murmured, her voice weak but tinged with humor. A few chuckles broke through the tension, laughter that felt like a balm against the lingering fear and exhaustion. The commander stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You carried this team. You carried all of us. You're a hero, and I hope you understand that." She looked around the room, at the operators who had risked everything alongside her, at the medics who had fought to stabilize her, at the commander whose words weighed heavily on her. She didn't respond immediately. The truth was simple yet profound. She had not sought glory. She had not sought recognition. Her actions had been instinctive, trained, and motivated by something far deeper than awards or accolades. She had fought because she had to. She had healed because it was her duty. She had survived because she could not allow herself to fall. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I did what I had to. That's all anyone can do." Yet the team knew the truth. Monroe had done far more than her duty. She had courage, skill, and unyielding resolve in the face of impossible odds. She had survived twice against death, carried the wounded, coordinated defenses, neutralized threats, and inspired every operator who had fought alongside her. As the day progressed began the slow process of recovery. Surgeons explained the extent of her injuries: shattered shoulder, fractured ribs, shrapnel wounds. Rehabilitation would be grueling. Pain would be constant, but her mind, as always, was focused. She would heal, she would return, she would continue to serve. The team watched her, silently acknowledging the bond forged in fire, bullets, and blood. They had seen bravery, they had seen skill, but they had also seen something rare: resilience. Monroe was alive, she was unbroken, and she had left a mark on every person who had witnessed her courage, a legacy forged in combat, etched in survival, and carried forever in the memory of those she had saved. The ceremony hall was filled with sunlight, polished floors reflecting the proud faces of the operators, commanders, and medics who had survived that impossible night. Monroe sat upright in her chair, uniform crisp, ribbons and insignia gleaming, but the weight of the past battle still clung to her like a second skin. Her shoulder throbbed beneath the bandage, ribs protested each breath, and scars, some visible, some unseen, to the night that had nearly claimed her life. Yet in her eyes burned the same unyielding fire that had guided her through smoke, bullets, and death. The commanding officer stepped forward, voice steady, resonant, commanding attention. Today, we honor not just bravery, but courage beyond comprehension. Petty Officer Monroe has demonstrated the very essence of what it means to serve, to fight, to heal, to endure. She faced the impossible, twice against death, and carried her team to safety when survival seemed improbable. Operators who had fought alongside her nodded, some with tears glistening in their eyes. Their silence spoke volumes, the unspoken acknowledgement that the life of every one of them had been spared because of her. The memory of bullets tearing past, explosions shaking the ground, and comrades lying wounded flashed across their minds. And through it all, Monroe had been their anchor, their shield, their unwavering guide. His gaze swept over the assembled team. The younger operators met her eyes with quiet reverence, their expressions a mix of awe and gratitude. They remembered the desert night vividly, the blast, the shrapnel, the chaos, and above all, her steady voice commanding, guiding, saving. They had followed her without hesitation because she had earned their trust through blood, pain, and skill. When the medal was placed in her hands, felt a strange weight, not of glory but of responsibility. The insignia, gleaming in polished metal, symbolized the lives she had saved, the battles she had fought, and the unbroken resolve that had carried her through the storm. She thought of the operators who had leaned on her that night, some of whom would never forget the cold sand beneath them, the roar of explosions, the acrid smell of smoke, and the whisper of hope her presence had given. Her mind drifted back to that fateful moment in the desert when the explosion had thrown her to the ground, when her shoulder had burned with pain and her ribs had screamed with each breath. Every instinct had screamed to surrender to the agony, yet she had refused. She had pushed herself, crawled forward, stabilized the wounded, neutralized threats, and guided her team through the inferno. Each decision had been precise, calculated, and deliberate, born of experience and an unbreakable will. One of the operators, younger than most, whispered quietly beside her, "I thought we were done for, Doc, but you didn't give up." Looked at him, eyes steady, voice quiet but firm. "I couldn't, not when you were still alive, not when the others needed me. That's what we do, we keep going, we survive." The room seemed to hold its breath. For a brief moment, medals, ribbons, and speeches were secondary to the unspoken truth. Courage isn't measured in accolades but in action, and Monroe's actions that night had redefined the word. The commanding officer continued, detailing each act of bravery, each wound endured, each life saved. Her presence on the battlefield was not just a comfort, it was survival itself. The team survived because of her. They lived because of her skill, her resolve, her unbroken spirit. His mind replayed the memories crawling through sand, bullets whizzing past, the snap of rifles, the screams of wounded operators, the surge of adrenaline, and the searing pain. Yet amidst that chaos, one constant had carried her forward, the understanding that giving up was not an option, that survival, leadership, and courage were intertwined, that being alive, unbroken, meant carrying others with you through the storm. When the ceremony concluded, was surrounded by the team. Hugs, handshakes, and quiet words of gratitude followed. Some operators struggled to speak, their emotions raw and unfiltered. She listened, nodded, offered faint smiles, but the quiet understanding was mutual. The bonds forged in fire were stronger than metals or words could ever convey. Later, alone for a brief moment, walked to the window overlooking the base. The desert stretched beyond, silent, harsh, and unforgiving. She remembered the night vividly, each explosion, each shot, each operator's face. She remembered the weight of responsibility, the searing pain, and the adrenaline that had kept her alive. And yet, despite it all, she had endured. She was alive. She was unbroken. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, eyes sharp, face bloodied and bruised, yet resolute. She thought of the team, of the operators who had trusted her life, and of the wounded who would carry her memory forward as the one who refused to yield. Courage, she realized, was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Survival was not just instinct. It was will, training, and the refusal to surrender. Monroe had survived impossible odds. She had healed, fought, and led in the face of death. She had carried lives in her hands and the weight of responsibility in her heart. And as the sun rose over the base, casting golden light across the room, she understood the truth. Being alive and unbroken was not just survival. It was legacy. The team would remember. The commanders would remember. The operators she had saved would carry her example for the rest of their lives. And she would continue to serve, to heal, to fight, carrying the lessons of that night wherever she went. The story of that desert night, of the explosions, bullets, and chaos, would be told in whispers, in reverent tones, across SEAL teams for years to come. But for Monroe, it was simple. She had faced death twice, carried others through the fire, and emerged alive, unbroken, and resolute. No medal could capture it. No words could define it. She was alive. She was unbroken. And she would remain that way, not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was who she was, and because she had promised that night in the sand and fire that no one would fall while she could stand. And so the desert night became memory. The wounds began to heal, and the legend of Monroe, the medic, the warrior, the unbroken, lived on in the hearts and minds of every operator who had survived because of her courage.